My name is Reynaldo Patterson, and at 67 years old, I never imagined my financial caution would save my daughter from disaster. 3 years ago, I inherited $33 million from my brilliant wife, Eleanor, after losing her to early-onset Alzheimer's. When my daughter, Sophia, married Derek last spring, something in my gut told me to keep that inheritance quiet. Thank God for that instinct, because just days after their honeymoon, Derek showed up at my front door with a notary and documents ready for my signature. I should have seen it coming from the beginning. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you believe parents should always trust their instincts about who their children choose as partners. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in South Boston, the son of a dock worker and a seamstress who shared a 2-bedroom apartment with my 2 younger brothers. My parents emphasized education as the pathway to opportunity, working double shifts to help with school supplies and saving every extra dollar for my future. Their sacrifice paid off when I earned a full scholarship to Boston University to study finance in 1974. During my first semester, I met Eleanor Chambers in advanced accounting. She sat 3 rows ahead, always first, with her hand up to answer the professor's most challenging questions. Unlike most wealthy business students, Eleanor attended on scholarship like me, determined to break into the male-dominated world of finance. I admired her from afar for weeks, before gathering the courage to ask her to study together for midterms. "I thought you'd never ask," she said, with that direct gaze that would both challenge and captivate me for the next 45 years. "I've been watching you take meticulous notes. I figured we could help each other." Our study sessions quickly became the highlight of my week. Eleanor possessed a brilliant analytical mind, seeing patterns and opportunities in financial data that I often missed. Where I was methodical and risk-averse, she was boldly strategic and forward-thinking. We balanced each other perfectly, challenging and supporting one another through our finance courses. We married the summer after graduation in 1978, a modest ceremony in my parents' backyard with just 30 guests. Neither of us had money for anything extravagant, but we didn't care. We were young, in love, and eager to build our careers. Our honeymoon was a weekend camping trip to the White Mountains of New Hampshire, where we sketched our 10-year plan on notebook paper beside a campfire. The early years weren't easy. We both started at entry-level positions, Eleanor at Morgan Stanley, and me at a smaller regional investment firm. We rented a tiny apartment in Somerville and pinched pennies, putting every extra dollar toward building our own investment portfolio. Eleanor spent evenings analyzing market trends, while I focused on client relationships and risk mitigation strategies. Eleanor's career accelerated faster than mine. Her uncanny ability to predict market movements and identify undervalued assets caught the attention of senior partners. By 1985, she was managing her own small fund, while I had moved into risk assessment and compliance at Boston Financial Group. We were finally stable enough financially to consider starting a family. In 1990, our daughter Sophia entered the world after several years of trying and 2 devastating miscarriages. I'll never forget the first time I held her, this tiny, perfect human, with Eleanor's sharp blue eyes and my dark, curly hair. Eleanor and I made a pact that night in the hospital. "We'll teach her everything we know about money," Eleanor whispered as we gazed at our sleeping daughter. "But we'll also teach her that relationships and integrity matter more than wealth." That philosophy guided our parenting as Sophia grew. While our careers advanced and our financial situation improved dramatically, we maintained relatively modest lifestyles. We moved to a comfortable 4-bedroom colonial in Newton, but nothing ostentatious. Eleanor's investment strategies proved increasingly successful, eventually leading her to start her own hedge fund in 2000, but we drove sensible cars and took educational family vacations rather than lavish trips. Eleanor insisted on keeping the details of our growing wealth private, even from Sophia. "I want her to develop her own work ethic and financial identity," she explained. "Too many wealthy kids lose their drive when they know they have a safety net." I agreed completely. We paid for Sophia's education and provided a comfortable life, but encouraged her to work summer jobs and manage her own budget from high school onward. She grew into a sensible, hard-working young woman who seemed to inherit both Eleanor's financial intuition and my cautious, analytical approach. Our family's world shifted dramatically in 2010 when Eleanor began showing subtle signs of cognitive decline at just 55 years old. At first, it was small things unusual for someone with her sharp mind, like forgetting appointments or struggling to recall specific investment details. When she couldn't remember our anniversary date, something she'd never forgotten in 32 years of marriage, I insisted on medical evaluation. The diagnosis devastated us: early onset Alzheimer's disease. The brilliant financial mind that had built strategies managing billions in assets would gradually fade away. Eleanor, ever practical, even in crisis, immediately went into planning mode. "I need to get everything in order while I still can," she said the day after diagnosis, already organizing files in her home office. "We need to restructure our assets, update the estate plan, and prepare for what's coming." I retired early from my position as Chief Risk Officer to become Eleanor's full-time caregiver. Over the next 7 years, I watched as my brilliant wife gradually slipped away. The disease was cruel, taking her analytical abilities first, then her independence, and finally, her recognition of the people she loved. Through it all, I cared for her at home, determined to honor our marriage vows in sickness and in health. During her lucid periods in the early stages, Eleanor worked with our attorneys to create an extensive estate plan. "I need to protect you and Sophia," she insisted, "but I also want to ensure our wealth is managed responsibly." She created a complex trust structure with specific provisions about privacy and asset distribution. At the time, I didn't fully understand her insistence on privacy clauses that limited disclosure of asset details, even to family members. Eleanor passed peacefully in our home in 2017. The grief was overwhelming, having lost my partner of 43 years in slow motion over 7 painful years. Sophia, then 27, and working as a financial analyst in Boston, moved back home temporarily to help me adjust to life without her mother. It was only after Eleanor's death that I fully comprehended the extent of her financial success. Our estate attorney revealed that through her brilliant investment strategies and careful management, Eleanor had accumulated assets worth $33 million, far more than I had realized. Her hedge fund had continued to perform exceptionally well, even after she stepped down from active management, and her early investments in several tech companies had multiplied dramatically. Eleanor's carefully structured trust named me as primary beneficiary, with Sophia to inherit after my passing, subject to specific age-related distribution provisions. The privacy clauses Eleanor had insisted upon now made sense, protecting both me and eventually Sophia from potential financial predators or exploitation. In honor of Eleanor's wishes, I maintained our modest lifestyle and kept the extent of the inheritance private, even from Sophia. I remained in our family home, continued driving my 8-year-old Volvo, and focused on processing my grief through volunteer work with the Alzheimer's Association. The $33 million sat in carefully managed investment accounts, growing steadily under the guidance of Eleanor's former colleagues, who respected her wishes for conservative, ethical investing strategies. Sophia eventually moved back to her own apartment in Boston and continued building her career at a respected investment firm. She visited regularly for Sunday dinners, and we maintained the close relationship we'd always had. I was proud of her independence and determination to succeed on her own merits, just as Eleanor had hoped. Little did I know how crucial Eleanor's privacy provisions would soon become. 2 years after Eleanor's passing, Sophia called me one Sunday evening, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Dad, I met someone amazing at the Financial Services Conference in Chicago," she gushed. "His name is Derek Chambers, and he's the marketing director for Apex Wealth Management. He's brilliant, Dad, and we've been talking non-stop since the conference." I was happy to hear such enthusiasm in my daughter's voice. Since Eleanor's death, Sophia had thrown herself into work, rarely mentioning her social life during our weekly dinners. She had dated occasionally in college and had one serious relationship that ended amicably when her boyfriend took a job in California, but career had always been her primary focus, much like her mother. 2 weeks later, Sophia brought Derek to Sunday dinner. My first impression was of a polished, handsome man in his mid-30s, dressed in what my experienced eye recognized as a tailor-made suit that likely cost several $1,000s. His firm handshake and direct eye contact spoke of confidence, perhaps bordering on arrogance. He immediately complimented my charming home, though something in his tone suggested he had expected something more impressive. "Sophia tells me you had quite a career in finance, Mr. Patterson," Derek said as we sat down to dinner. "Risk assessment at Boston Financial Group, right? I know several people there. Small world." Throughout dinner, Derek displayed an impressive knowledge of the finance industry and current market trends. He spoke eloquently about his role developing marketing strategies for high-net-worth clients at Apex. What struck me, however, was his repeated emphasis on the luxury aspects of his work, the celebrity clients, the lavish events, the status symbols that seemed to matter greatly to him. "I just upgraded to the new Mercedes S-Class," he mentioned casually. "After the bonus I received for bringing in the Westfield account, I figured I deserved it. Life's too short to deny yourself the finer things, right?" I noticed Sophia watching him with admiration as he detailed his recent vacation to Monaco. This materialistic focus seemed at odds with the values Eleanor and I had instilled in her, but I reminded myself that initial meetings can be awkward, with people not always showing their authentic selves. When Derek excused himself to take a phone call, Sophia leaned toward me eagerly. "What do you think? Isn't he wonderful?" "He seems very accomplished," I said carefully. "How long have you been seeing each other?" "Just 3 weeks. But Dad, there's something special here. We connect on so many levels." After dinner, Derek's attention turned to family photos displayed on my mantel. He paused at one of Eleanor receiving an industry award. "Your late wife was Eleanor Patterson of Patterson Capital Management," he asked, his tone changing subtly. "I had no idea. She was legendary in certain circles." His subsequent questions about Eleanor's career became increasingly specific, focusing on the size of her fund before illness, the clients she had managed, and ultimately, how her estate had been settled. I deflected politely, keeping answers vague, while noting his particular interest in financial details. Over the next few months, Sophia and Derek's relationship progressed with surprising speed. My normally practical daughter was suddenly sporting designer clothes, a new luxury watch, and talking about exclusive restaurants and clubs Derek had introduced her to. When I asked about these changes, she explained that Derek came from family money and enjoyed sharing his lifestyle with her. "He's teaching me to enjoy life more, Dad," she said. "Mom's illness and passing made me realize we shouldn't postpone happiness." I couldn't argue with that sentiment, having witnessed Eleanor's decline, yet something felt off about the rapid transformation in my level-headed daughter. During one dinner, Derek casually asked if I had maintained Eleanor's investment accounts or liquidated everything after her passing. The question seemed innocent enough, but my years in risk assessment had taught me to recognize fishing expeditions. 6 months after they met, Sophia called me on a Tuesday evening, breathless with excitement. "Dad, Derek proposed. We're engaged." The news stunned me. While I'd expected their relationship was serious, the timeline seemed rushed, especially for my traditionally cautious daughter. "That's big news," I managed. "Are you sure you're ready for marriage after just 6 months?" "When you know, she replied, echoing words I'd never expected to hear from my analytically minded daughter. He proposed at Le Cirque with a string quartet playing our song. "It was magical, Dad. The ring is 3 carats. I congratulated her, swallowing my concerns. When they visited that weekend to officially celebrate the engagement, Derek surprised me by bringing up the topic of a prenuptial agreement. "I believe in protecting both parties," he explained smoothly. "My family has certain expectations about financial planning, And I'm sure with Sophia's background in finance and her family history, you both understand the importance of clear financial boundaries in marriage. The mention of family history caught my attention, as did the calculating look in his eyes. It seemed Derek assumed there was significant wealth from Eleanor's career, despite our modest lifestyle. That's very responsible, I replied neutrally. Sophia's mother and I always believed in thoughtful financial planning. Later, when Derek was taking a business call outside, I gently suggested to Sophia that perhaps they might consider premarital counseling, given the whirlwind nature of their relationship. "Dad, stop," she said, a defensive edge in her voice I'd rarely heard. "Derek and I understand each other perfectly. We don't need counseling. And if this is about money, Derek has already offered a prenup to protect me. He's being incredibly generous." I backed off immediately, recognizing that pushing would only create distance between us. Yet that night, after they left, I called Thomas Blackwell, the attorney who had handled Eleanor's estate planning. "I'd like to review my current arrangements," I told him, "and discuss some additional protections that might be necessary." Thomas agreed to meet the following week. "Is there something specific prompting this review?" he asked. "My daughter recently got engaged," I replied, very quickly, to someone who seems unusually interested in her mother's financial legacy. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "I see," Thomas finally said. "I think we should definitely meet sooner rather than later." At Thomas's recommendation, I maintained complete privacy about the $33 million inheritance, even as wedding plans accelerated. Each time Derek probed about Eleanor's career or financial matters, I redirected the conversation or kept answers deliberately vague. I began to notice how frequently these questions arose, always framed casually, but with persistent regularity. My instincts from years of risk assessment were on high alert. Something about Derek's interest in family finances went beyond normal curiosity, but I kept my concerns to myself to maintain peace with my excited daughter. Looking back now, I thank God every day that I trusted those instincts. Wedding planning began almost immediately, with Derek taking an unusually active role. At their first dinner after the engagement, he arrived with a leather portfolio containing detailed plans for what he described as the perfect celebration. "I'm thinking the Rosewood Hotel ballroom," he announced, showing us professional photographs. "They can accommodate 300 guests, and their executive chef trained under Gordon Ramsay." Sophia looked slightly overwhelmed, but pleased by his enthusiasm. I was surprised by the scale, knowing my daughter had always talked about preferring smaller, more intimate gatherings. 300 guests? I questioned gently. "That sounds quite extensive." Derek smiled confidently. "We need to accommodate my business associates and family friends. It's important to make the right impression." As he continued outlining his vision, complete with imported flowers, a 10-piece orchestra, and custom crystal champagne flutes as favors, I mentally calculated costs. By my estimate, he was describing a wedding that would easily exceed $200,000. When the conversation turned to finances, I offered what I considered a generous contribution. "I'd like to give $50,000 toward the wedding costs," I said. "That should cover a significant portion." A flicker of disappointment crossed Derek's face before his smile returned. "That's very generous, Reynaldo. Of course, I'll handle the rest. I want to give Sophia the day she deserves." Later that week, the wedding planner Derek had already hired called me with questions about family contributions. During our conversation, she let slip something concerning. "Derek mentioned you might be considering a larger contribution after discussing matters with your financial advisors," she said delicately. "He indicated there might be significant resources from your late wife's estate that could be allocated to the wedding." I carefully corrected this assumption without revealing details, but the interaction troubled me deeply. Derek had clearly been making assumptions about my financial situation and discussing them with others. At Thomas Blackwell's office the following day, I shared these developments. "I'm increasingly concerned about Derek's expectations regarding family money," I explained. "He seems to believe there's significant wealth from Eleanor's career, despite no evidence of that in our lifestyle." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Eleanor's privacy provisions were designed precisely for situations like this. I suggest we take additional protective measures. Under his guidance, I updated my will and created a new trust for Sophia that included specific conditions and protections. We also documented the pattern of financial inquiries from Derek, creating a record should issues arise later. As wedding preparations continued, Derek's questions about Eleanor's career became more specific. During a dinner discussing final arrangements, he casually asked, "Did Eleanor's partners buy out her share of the fund when she became ill, or did she retain ownership until her passing? Those arrangements can be so complicated." When I provided only general answers, his frustration was briefly visible before his charming mask returned. That same evening, he mentioned looking at multi-million-dollar properties in exclusive neighborhoods. "We want to start our married life in a home that reflects our status," he explained. "Nothing less than 5,000 square feet will do." Sophia looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict him. I was increasingly troubled by how her practical nature seemed subsumed by his materialistic influence. The wedding weekend arrived in June, bringing 300 guests to the Rosewood Hotel. During the rehearsal dinner, I met Derek's parents for the first time, a middle-class couple from Minnesota who appeared overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding them. "This is all so extravagant," Derek's mother whispered to me during cocktail hour. When Derek said he was handling the wedding, we had no idea it would be quite so elaborate. "Derek has very specific tastes," I replied carefully. She nodded, looking troubled. "He always did, even as a child. Always wanted what the wealthier children had. We could never quite satisfy him." Later that evening, I overheard a concerning conversation between Derek and his best man when they didn't realize I was around the corner of the hotel terrace. "You finally did it," the best man said, his words slightly slurred from champagne. "Found yourself a real jackpot this time." Derek laughed. "James, lower your voice. But yes, this situation has significant potential. Her mother managed billions before she died. There's no way there isn't serious money there, even if the old man lives modestly, just waiting to be unlocked." "Better outcome than the Seattle disaster," James replied. "Lesson learned there," Derek said. "Always verify the assets before the commitment." I slipped away before they spotted me, my worst suspicions confirmed. Derek was indeed targeting what he believed was Sophia's inheritance. The Seattle disaster suggested this wasn't his first attempt at such a strategy. The wedding day itself was beautiful, but felt strangely impersonal. The ceremony included none of the family traditions or personal touches that would have reflected Sophia's relationship with her mother or our family history. Instead, it seemed designed primarily for Instagram perfection, with branded hashtags and a social media coordinator, ensuring every moment was captured for online consumption. During my father of the bride toast, I spoke about Eleanor's values and the wisdom she had hoped to pass to Sophia. "Your mother believed that true wealth comes from integrity, hard work, and loving relationships," I said, watching Sophia's eyes fill with tears. She measured success not by acquisitions, but by impact and personal growth. I noticed Derek shifting impatiently during these remarks, checking his watch subtly as I spoke about Eleanor's financial prudence and ethical approach to wealth. When I finished, he quickly signaled the band to begin playing, cutting short the moment of reflection. Throughout the reception, I maintained absolute silence about the $33 million inheritance. Several of Eleanor's former colleagues attended, and when financial topics arose, I steered conversations toward general industry matters rather than specific details about Eleanor's success or our personal finances. Before Sophia and Derek departed for their honeymoon, a 2-week stay at an exclusive resort in the Maldives, costing well over $30,000, I had a brief private moment with my daughter. "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart," I said, embracing her. "Your mother would have been proud of the woman you've become." "Thanks, Dad," she replied, looking momentarily like her old self. "I miss her today, especially." "Promise you'll come see me when you get back from the honeymoon," I said. "The house feels empty without our Sunday dinners." "Of course," she assured me, Nothing will change that tradition. As I watched them drive away in the luxury vintage Rolls-Royce Derek had rented for the occasion, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, and not for the better. I returned to my modest home, grateful for Eleanor's foresight in keeping our financial affairs private, and waited for what I increasingly suspected would be a revealing test of Derek's true character and motivations. 2 weeks after the wedding, Sophia called to let me know they had returned from their honeymoon. Her voice sounded strained, despite her assertions that the Maldives had been absolute paradise. "Derek and I would like to come over for dinner tomorrow," she said. "There's something important we want to discuss with you." "Of course," I replied, noting the unusual formality in her tone. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," she said quickly. "Just some family financial planning we want to talk about." The phrase, family financial planning, immediately set off warning bells. In my 40-year career in finance, I'd learned that such euphemisms often preceded uncomfortable money requests. They arrived the following evening, Derek driving a brand new Porsche that hadn't been in their driveway before the wedding. I welcomed them into my comfortable but modest 3-bedroom colonial, the same home where Sophia had grown up. I noticed Derek scanning the living room, his eyes lingering on the ordinary furniture and lack of luxury items with poorly disguised disappointment. "Lovely home as always, Reynaldo," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "So much history here." Dinner was a tense affair. Sophia seemed nervous, picking at her food while Derek dominated the conversation with stories about their honeymoon, emphasizing the exclusivity of their overwater bungalow and the celebrity they had spotted at a neighboring resort. Throughout his monologue, he repeatedly steered the conversation toward Eleanor's career. Sophia mentioned that Eleanor was something of a pioneer for women in hedge fund management, he said, refilling his wine glass for the 3rd time. Her fund must have been quite successful to earn that kind of reputation. "She worked very hard," I replied simply. "She was well respected by her peers." As I served coffee after dinner, Derek finally addressed the real purpose of their visit. "Reynaldo, we wanted to talk to you about our future plans. Sophia and I have found the perfect home to start our married life." Sophia finally spoke up, though she avoided meeting my eyes. "It's in Beacon Hill, Dad. A beautiful brownstone with 5 bedrooms and a rooftop terrace." "Sounds lovely," I said carefully. "Beacon Hill is certainly an exclusive area." Derek nodded enthusiastically. "It's exactly the neighborhood someone of Sophia's background should be living in. The asking price is $2.5 million, which is actually quite reasonable for the location and square footage." I nearly choked on my coffee. $2.5 million? That's quite a significant investment for a first home. "Which brings us to the purpose of our visit," Derek continued smoothly. "We've been discussing family financial planning, and we believe it makes sense to utilize some of the family resources for this investment." "Family resources?" I echoed, looking directly at Sophia, who continued to avoid my gaze. Derek leaned forward. "Reynaldo, we're aware that Eleanor's fund was quite successful. Sophia is her only child, and now that she's married and starting a new phase of life, it seems logical that any inheritance or family money would be put toward establishing our future." The directness of his assumption stunned me. Sophia finally looked up, clearly embarrassed by Derek's approach, but not contradicting him. "Dad," she said softly, "we thought perhaps you might help with the down payment. 20% would be $500,000. I took a deep breath, carefully considering my response. I'm afraid there may be some misunderstandings about my financial situation. Eleanor's career was indeed successful, but medical costs during her 7 years of illness were substantial. I live primarily on my teacher's pension and modest savings." Derek's expression shifted from confident expectation to disbelief, but Eleanor ran Patterson Capital Management. Industry estimates put their assets under management at over $3 billion before she stepped down. "Assets under management belong to clients, not to the managers," I explained gently. "While Eleanor earned a good living, we always lived modestly and focused on saving for retirement and Sophia's education." Derek's face flushed with barely contained frustration. but surely there was a significant estate. Life insurance, investment accounts, retirement funds. I'm comfortable, I said firmly, but not in a position to provide a $500,000 gift. I can offer to help with a more modest down payment on a starter home, perhaps $50,000, similar to my contribution to your wedding. The rest of the evening was awkward, with Derek barely concealing his disappointment and anger. They left earlier than planned, Derek making a thin excuse about an early meeting the next day. Sophia hugged me goodbye with tears in her eyes, whispering, "I'm sorry about that, Dad. We'll figure something out." As I cleared the dinner dishes, I reflected on the interaction, increasingly certain that Derek had married my daughter with specific financial expectations. I called Thomas Blackwell first thing the next morning to update him on the conversation. "This confirms our concerns," Thomas said gravely. "Be prepared for escalation. Men like Derek rarely give up easily when money is their primary motivation." His warning proved prophetic. At 9:30 the following morning, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Derek standing there with another man carrying a briefcase. "Ronaldo, good morning," Derek said with forced cheerfulness. "I hope we're not catching you at a bad time. This is Nathan Wells, a notary public. We have some documents I'd like to discuss with you." Stunned by this unexpected visit, I reluctantly invited them in. Derek immediately spread several official-looking documents across my dining room table. "After our conversation last night, I realized we need to take a more structured approach to family financial planning," he began. "I've prepared a simple family loan agreement that would allow Sophia and me to purchase our ideal home, while providing you with a fair return on investment." I glanced at the document, immediately recognizing it as anything but simple. Buried within the dense legal language of the so-called loan agreement were provisions granting Derek power of attorney over my financial affairs, access to all banking information, and authority to make investment decisions on my behalf. "This would benefit everyone," Derek continued his pitch. "You'd receive monthly interest payments, while we'd be able to establish ourselves properly in a home befitting Sophia's background." I noticed the notary shifting uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Clearly, he recognized the predatory nature of these documents. "This requires careful review," I said calmly. "I'll need my attorney to examine these before I could consider signing anything." Derek's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "There's really no need for expensive legal consultations. These are standard agreements, and we're family now. Don't you trust your daughter and son-in-law?" "Trust has nothing to do with proper financial diligence," I replied, drawing on my decades in risk assessment. "I never signed any financial document without thorough review during my career, and I certainly won't start now." Derek's expression darkened. "I think you're being unnecessarily difficult. Sophia deserves access to her family legacy. Eleanor would have wanted her to benefit from her success." "Eleanor was very specific about her wishes," I stated firmly, "and they included careful financial planning, not rushed decisions." The mask finally slipped completely. Derek gathered the papers with barely controlled anger. "I think you're hiding something, Reynaldo. There's no way Eleanor's estate simply vanished. Sophia has a right to her mother's legacy, and as her husband, I intend to ensure she receives it." "I suggest we all take some time to cool down," I said, standing to indicate the meeting was over. "Financial decisions should never be made in haste or anger." Derek stood as well, his face flushed. "This isn't over. If you won't be reasonable about this, we have other options. Sophia could legally challenge any attempt to hide her inheritance." As they left, I immediately called Thomas Blackwell again, describing the encounter in detail. "He brought a notary to my house unannounced with documents granting him power of attorney," I explained. "This goes well beyond simple greed, into potentially criminal territory." "Document everything," Thomas advised. "Save any emails or texts, and write down everything you remember from this interaction while it's fresh. I'm going to file for an emergency hearing to protect your assets." I spent the rest of the day in a state of shock, struggling to process Derek's blatant attempt to gain control of what he believed was hidden wealth. I tried calling Sophia several times, but each call went straight to voicemail. Had Derek convinced her to participate in this scheme, or was she an unwitting pawn? Either possibility broke my heart. That evening, I received a text from Sophia. "I'm sorry about Derek coming over like that. He's just trying to secure our future. Can we talk tomorrow? Alone?" I responded immediately. "Of course. Come for lunch. Just you." I slept poorly that night, haunted by memories of Eleanor's decline and her insistence on financial privacy. People change when money is involved, she had warned during one of her lucid periods. Protect yourself and Sophia. Her foresight had been remarkable, even as her brilliant mind was failing. Once again, I thanked God I had kept quiet about the $33 million inheritance during Sophia's wedding. That decision now appeared to have saved us all from disaster. A week of uncomfortable silence followed the notary incident. Despite Sophia's text suggesting we meet, she canceled our lunch at the last minute with a vague excuse about work obligations. My calls went unanswered, or were returned with brief, formal texts that didn't sound like my daughter at all. The distance growing between us was painful, but I knew pushing too hard might only drive her further away. During this difficult period, I met with Thomas Blackwell to implement additional protections for the assets Eleanor had left. "We need to prepare for the possibility that Derek might convince Sophia to take legal action," Thomas advised. "While the trusts Eleanor established are quite secure, litigation can be messy and emotionally devastating." "I can handle financial challenges," I replied. "I'm more worried about losing my daughter." With Thomas's guidance, I hired Martin Reeves, a private investigator with experience in financial fraud cases. "I need to understand who I'm dealing with," I explained. "Derek Chambers seems to have targeted my daughter for financial gain, and I need evidence to help her see the truth." Martin began his investigation immediately, while I reached out to William Hayes, Eleanor's former colleague and now manager of her investment portfolio. William and I met for coffee at a quiet cafe downtown, away from the financial district where Derek might have connections. "I should have contacted you sooner," William said after I explained the situation. "Derek approached me about 3 months ago, shortly after the engagement was announced. He claimed to be acting on Sophia's behalf, seeking information about Eleanor's investments and any estate provisions." My stomach tightened. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing specific," William assured me. "Eleanor's confidentiality directives prevented me from sharing details without proper authorization. But the encounter troubled me. His questions were too pointed, too focused on quantifying assets rather than understanding Eleanor's investment philosophy or legacy. This confirmation of Derek's behind-the-scenes maneuvering strengthened my resolve to protect both the inheritance and my daughter from his schemes. 3 days later, Martin Reeves contacted me with preliminary findings. We met in Thomas Blackwell's office to ensure attorney-client privilege would protect our discussion. "Derek Chambers has a concerning history," Martin began, opening a file containing his report. "His financial records show significant personal debt, including 3 maxed-out credit cards, an underwater mortgage on a condo he owns in Back Bay, and substantial gambling losses at casinos in Connecticut and online." "Gambling?" I echoed, surprised by this detail. Martin nodded grimly. "Primarily high-stakes poker and sports betting. He's lost approximately $120,000 in the past 18 months, according to his bank records." The report also revealed something even more disturbing, a pattern in Derek's personal life that aligned perfectly with his behavior towards Sophia. 2 years ago, Derek was engaged to Patricia Whitman, a 62-year-old widow in Seattle whose husband had founded a successful software company, Martin explained. The engagement ended abruptly when Mrs. Whitman discovered Derek had been systematically researching her financial holdings and attempting to access her late husband's estate information. "The Seattle disaster," I murmured, recalling the conversation I'd overheard between Derek and his best man. "Exactly," Martin confirmed. "Before that, he dated the daughter of a prominent Boston real estate developer for approximately 8 months, ending the relationship shortly after discovering her father had structured his wealth to remain under his control until his death. The pattern was undeniable. Derek systematically targeted women he believed had access to significant wealth, abandoning the relationships when the financial prospects proved less accessible than anticipated. As I digested this troubling information, my phone rang. It was Sophia, her voice tearful and strained. "Dad, can I come over? Alone. Please don't tell Derek." "Of course, sweetheart. I'm actually downtown right now, but I can be home in 30 minutes. I met Sophia at our family home an hour later. The moment I opened the door, I knew something had changed dramatically. My confident, composed daughter looked exhausted, with dark circles under red-rimmed eyes. She fell into my arms, sobbing in a way I hadn't seen since her mother's funeral. We sat in the kitchen, the heart of our family home, where Eleanor had taught Sophia to bake cookies and calculate percentages at the same age. I made tea, giving her space to collect herself before speaking. "I'm so confused, Dad," she finally said, her hands wrapped around the mug as if seeking warmth. "Everything is happening so fast, and I feel like I don't recognize my life anymore." "What's happened?" I asked gently. "Derek has been different since the wedding, especially since our dinner here." She took a shaky breath. "He was furious after you declined to help with the house. He kept saying you must be hiding Mom's money, that there's no way a fund manager of her caliber wouldn't leave millions." I listened quietly, letting her continue without interruption. "At first, I defended you, explaining that you and Mom always lived modestly. But Derek was so convinced, so certain." She looked up, tears welling again. "He started demanding I challenge the will, claiming you must have manipulated Mom during her illness to change estate plans." My heart ached at the thought of Derek poisoning my daughter against me with such accusations. "And what do you believe?" I asked carefully. "I don't know anymore," she admitted, "but things have gotten worse. Derek's been so angry, yelling when I question anything. Last week, I found credit card statements he'd hidden, showing over $70,000 in debt. When I confronted him, he claimed it was temporary, that once we accessed the Patterson fortune, it would be meaningless." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper. "Yesterday, I used his laptop to check our joint account balance. His browser history was open. Dad, he's been researching, challenging a mother's will, and hidden assets in trusts. He even searched for lawyers specializing in contesting estates." The pain in her eyes reflected not just confusion, but the dawning recognition of betrayal. I'm scared to confront him directly. When I ask questions about our finances, he gets defensive and accuses me of not trusting him. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Sophia, there's something you need to know. I've been concerned about Derek's intentions, so I hired an investigator to look into his background." Her eyes widened, but she didn't pull away or protest. I carefully shared Martin's findings about Derek's financial troubles, gambling habit, and history of targeting wealthy women, including the broken engagement in Seattle. At first, Sophia seemed defensive, shaking her head in denial. But as the evidence mounted, her expression shifted from resistance to shock, and finally, to heartbroken recognition. "So our entire relationship was a lie?" she whispered. "He never loved me at all?" "I can't know what was in his heart," I said honestly. "But his actions suggest he had motivations beyond love and partnership." Sophia sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing this painful revelation. Finally, she looked up, her mother's strength visible in her expression despite her tears. "I need time to think," she said. "This is all so overwhelming. Part of me wants to confront him immediately, but another part is afraid of what might happen if I do." "Take whatever time you need," I assured her. "This house is always your home, no matter what." She left conflicted, but with eyes newly opened to the possibility that her whirlwind romance had been calculated deception. As I watched her drive away, I prayed she would find the clarity and courage to see the truth, however painful. Over the next 2 days, I consulted further with Thomas and Martin, preparing for various scenarios that might unfold. We documented everything, creating a comprehensive file of Derek's attempts to access Eleanor's estate information and the pattern of behavior, suggesting financial predation. On the third evening after our conversation, my doorbell rang at nearly 11 o'clock. I opened it to find Sophia standing there with 2 suitcases and tears streaming down her face. "Dad," she said simply, "you were right. About everything." I pulled her into an embrace, relief, and sadness, mingling as I welcomed my daughter home, away from the man who had targeted her as an access point to wealth that he believed was her inheritance. As we sat in the living room with mugs of hot chocolate, just as we had during difficult nights after Eleanor's diagnosis, Sophia shared what had finally convinced her of Derek's true nature. "I found emails," she said quietly. "He's been corresponding with someone named James about the Patterson fortune, since before we even got engaged. They discussed strategy for getting me to push for access to Mom's estate." Her voice broke. There was one from just after he proposed where he called me the golden ticket to financial freedom. In that moment of painful clarity, I thanked Eleanor's foresight once again. Her insistence on financial privacy had protected our daughter from an even more devastating exploitation. Though Sophia was hurting now, she had discovered the truth before Derek could cause irreparable damage to her life and our family legacy. As Sophia settled into her childhood bedroom that night, I realized we had entered a new phase of this ordeal. Derek would not simply accept defeat and disappear. The confrontation was only beginning. But now Sophia and I would face it together, with truth as our strongest ally. The days following Sophia's return home were filled with painful realizations and careful planning. Derek's calls and texts came relentlessly at first, alternating between concern, anger, and manipulation. Sophia forwarded everything to Martin and Thomas, building our documentation of his behavior while responding minimally to avoid escalation. "We need to approach this strategically," Thomas advised during a meeting with Sophia, Martin, and me in his office. "Derek clearly believes there's significant wealth to be gained. If we simply proceed with divorce without addressing his financial expectations, he may become more aggressive in his attempts to access what he believes exists." "What do you suggest?" Sophia asked. The past week had transformed her, stripping away the glamorous veneer Derek had cultivated and revealing again the pragmatic, thoughtful woman Eleanor and I had raised. "A controlled confrontation," Thomas replied. "On our terms, in my office, with documentation ready to counter any claims or threats he might make." We spent 3 days preparing, gathering evidence of Derek's deception and documenting his attempts to access Eleanor's estate information. Sophia provided emails, texts, and details of conversations that revealed his focus on financial gain throughout their relationship. Martin completed his investigation, adding concerning discoveries about Derek's gambling debts and a previous legal complaint from an employer regarding misappropriated client information. When preparations were complete, Thomas had his assistant call Derek with a carefully crafted message. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson would like to meet with you regarding Eleanor Patterson's estate planning. They are prepared to discuss financial arrangements that may be of interest to you and Sophia." The bait worked perfectly. Derek agreed immediately to meet the following afternoon, likely believing his persistence had finally worn us down. Thomas's conference room provided the perfect setting for our confrontation. Professional and formal, with recording equipment discreetly activated with Derek's legal knowledge but without highlighting its presence. Sophia and I arrived early with Thomas, reviewing our approach one final time. "Remember," Thomas advised Sophia, "stay calm regardless of what he says or how he reacts. The evidence speaks for itself." Derek arrived precisely on time, dressed impeccably in a designer suit and sporting a confident smile that faltered slightly when he saw Sophia sitting beside me rather than greeting him as a wife. "Sophia, I've been worried sick," he began, ignoring Thomas and me. "You haven't been answering my calls. What's going on?" Sophia maintained remarkable composure, her voice steady. "Please sit down, Derek. We have important matters to discuss." His eyes narrowed slightly at her businesslike tone, but he took a seat across the table, placing his leather portfolio before him like armor. "I understand we're here to discuss Eleanor's estate," he said, focusing on me. "I'm glad you've reconsidered your position, Reynaldo. Sophia deserves her rightful inheritance. Thomas spoke before I could respond. Actually, Mr. Chambers, we're here to address several concerning matters regarding your behavior and apparent intentions toward the Patterson family. Derek's confident expression flickered. I don't understand. My only concern has been ensuring my wife receives what's rightfully hers. Is that why you researched challenging a mother's will and hidden assets in trusts? Sophia asked quietly, sliding printed copies of his browser history across the table. Or why you told your friend James I was your golden ticket to financial freedom before you even proposed? The color drained from Derek's face as he recognized his own emails printed beneath the browser history. You went through my private communications? That's invasion of privacy. And bringing a notary to my father's house with hidden power of attorney documents wasn't? Sophia countered. Thomas methodically laid out the evidence we had gathered, including Derek's gambling debts, his previous engagement to Patricia Whitman in Seattle that ended when his financial motivations were discovered, and statements from Eleanor's colleagues confirming his attempts to gain information about her estate. This pattern of behavior suggests a deliberate strategy to access what you believed was substantial wealth, Thomas concluded, rather than a genuine desire for partnership in marriage. Derek's shock at being confronted with comprehensive evidence quickly transformed to anger. This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything to make me look bad. Sophia, you can't possibly believe this character assassination. When Sophia remained unmoved, his approach shifted to bargaining. Look, perhaps I've been overzealous about financial matters, but that doesn't change how I feel about you, Sophia. We can work through this. Couples have financial disagreements all the time. This wasn't a disagreement, Sophia replied firmly. It was calculated deception. You targeted me because of who my mother was, believing I had millions waiting for me. That's not fair, Derek protested, though his denial lacked conviction. Yes, I was aware of your background, but that wasn't why I fell in love with you. As his denials became less convincing, I finally spoke. Derek, we're not here to debate your feelings. We're here because Sophia has decided to end the marriage based on the evidence of your true intentions. Thomas slid divorce papers across the table. These documents include a standard dissolution of marriage, with terms following the prenuptial agreement you both signed. Miss Patterson will be returning to her maiden name immediately. Derek stared at the papers in disbelief. This is absurd. We've been married less than a month. You can't possibly want to throw away our marriage over a financial misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Sophia said, her voice stronger now. It was a fundamental breach of trust. You married me for what you thought I would inherit, not for who I am. When Derek realized Sophia was unmovable, his demeanor changed completely. The charming mask fell away entirely, revealing the calculating person beneath. Fine, he snapped, pushing the divorce papers aside. If that's how you want to play this, I'll fight it every step of the way. I have rights as your husband. I'll contest this divorce and demand a full accounting of all family assets. Eleanor Patterson managed billions. There's no way there isn't significant money somewhere, and I'm entitled to my share. Thomas smiled thinly. Actually, Mr. Chambers, you might want to review the prenuptial agreement you so generously offered to sign, the very agreement you presented to demonstrate your lack of financial motivation. Derek grabbed the copy Thomas provided, scanning it with growing alarm. The prenuptial he had signed, believing it would help convince Sophia and me of his sincere intentions, actually contained robust protections that prevented him from claiming any family assets in the event of divorce, regardless of when the marriage ended. This can't be legally binding, he sputtered. It's too one-sided. It was drafted by a top family law attorney, properly executed, and signed by you, with full disclosure. Thomas replied calmly. You were so confident there were millions to be gained that you didn't bother to have it properly reviewed by your own counsel. That was a significant error in judgment. Derek's face flushed with anger. This isn't over. I know there's money from Eleanor's fund. No successful hedge fund manager leaves nothing behind. I'll find it, and I'll get what I deserve. You already have what you deserve, Sophia said quietly. Absolutely nothing. With that devastating statement, She stood and walked out of the conference room, head held high despite the tears in her eyes. I followed after giving Derek one final look, seeing the calculation still working behind his eyes even in defeat. Derek's threats continued over the following weeks, including a late-night visit to Sophia's apartment that resulted in a restraining order. He violated that order a week later, leading to his arrest and a night in jail that finally seemed to penetrate his delusion that he could intimidate us into financial concessions. The divorce proceedings moved forward efficiently, thanks to the prenuptial agreement, and Derek's growing realization that continuing to fight would only damage him further. When his employer learned of his arrest and the circumstances surrounding it, Derek was placed on administrative leave pending investigation, further weakening his position. In the end, the marriage was dissolved just 3 months after the wedding, with no financial entanglements. Derek left Boston shortly afterward, reportedly taking a position with a smaller firm in Chicago, his reputation in Boston's financial circles tarnished by whispered accounts of his predatory behavior. Throughout this difficult period, I watched my daughter reclaim her strength and independence, shedding the materialistic veneer Derek had cultivated and returning to the values Eleanor and I had instilled. Though the experience had wounded her deeply, it had also revealed her resilience and clarity of purpose when confronted with difficult truths. "I feel so foolish," she confessed one evening as we sat on the back porch, watching fireflies in the garden. "How did I not see through him?" "He was very skilled at deception," I replied gently. "And sometimes we see what we want to see, especially when someone makes us feel special and desired." She nodded, quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about Mom. How disappointed she would be in my poor judgment." "Your mother would be incredibly proud of your strength in facing the truth," I assured her. "She valued integrity above all else, and you showed tremendous integrity when it mattered most." As summer turned to fall, Sophia began rebuilding her life with characteristic determination, throwing herself into her work and reconnecting with friends she had neglected during her whirlwind relationship with Derek. The painful chapter was closing, making way for healing and new beginnings fortified by hard-won wisdom. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Sophia and I sat in Thomas Blackwell's office for a meeting I had carefully planned with his guidance. The time had come for complete honesty about Eleanor's legacy. "There's something important I need to share with you," I began, taking Sophia's hand. "Something your mother and I decided to keep private until the right moment." Thomas placed a folder on the table between us. "These are the complete records of Eleanor Patterson's estate planning and current asset management." Sophia looked confused. "But I thought we already knew about Mom's estate. The modest investments, the life insurance that helped with her medical care. That was only part of the picture," I explained gently. "Your mother was extraordinarily successful, more than we ever discussed openly. Her investment strategies and fund management generated significant wealth, which she carefully structured to protect both of us." As Thomas opened the folder, revealing statements showing the $33 million inheritance Eleanor had left, Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. $33 million? She whispered. "But we always lived so modestly. My whole life, we never." "Your mother believed strongly that wealth should be managed responsibly, not flaunted," I explained. "She worried that knowing about this inheritance too early might affect your development, your work ethic, or attract people with ulterior motives." Understanding dawned in Sophia's expression. "Like Derek," I nodded. "Eleanor created a comprehensive trust structure with specific privacy provisions. Even after her death, I honored her wishes by maintaining that privacy, living modestly, and waiting for the right time to share the full truth with you." "That's why you kept it quiet during the wedding," Sophia realized. "You had concerns about Derek from the beginning." "I had questions," I acknowledged, "but I wanted to respect your choices. Keeping the inheritance private was simply following Eleanor's carefully considered plan." As Thomas explained the details of the trust, including provisions for Sophia to receive portions at different age milestones and eventually manage the entire estate, I watched my daughter process this revelation with the thoughtful analysis that reminded me so much of her mother. Mom protected us even after she was gone, Sophia said finally, tears in her eyes. Her foresight saved me from what could have been a much worse situation with Derek. In the weeks that followed, Sophia immersed herself in understanding the inheritance and Eleanor's investment philosophy. Rather than changing her lifestyle dramatically, she approached the wealth with the same practical mindfulness Eleanor had embodied. I want to honor Mom's legacy properly, she told me, over Sunday dinner, a tradition we had firmly reestablished, not just by preserving the assets, but by extending her values and vision. Together, we established the Eleanor Patterson Foundation for Financial Literacy, focusing particularly on helping women develop financial independence and recognize exploitative relationships. Sophia took a leadership role on the foundation's board, bringing her professional expertise and personal experience to shape educational programs for schools and community organizations. The foundation partnered with law enforcement agencies to create awareness campaigns about financial exploitation, particularly targeting seniors and young inheritors. Derek's pattern of behavior became an anonymized case study in these materials, potentially preventing others from falling victim to similar predatory tactics. Sophia found the work healing, transforming her painful experience into protection for others. Every time we help someone recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation, it gives meaning to what happened, she explained during a foundation event. It wasn't just a personal trauma, but a lesson that can benefit others. While the foundation flourished, Sophia also focused on her personal healing. She returned to graduate school part-time, pursuing a degree in financial psychology that combined her finance background with new insights into how emotions and relationships influence financial decision-making. Mom always said numbers tell stories if you know how to listen, she told me after her first semester. I'm learning to hear the human stories behind financial behaviors, not just the mathematics. My own approach to Eleanor's inheritance evolved as well. After decades of focusing on risk assessment and protection, I began exploring more active philanthropy, always guided by Eleanor's values. I established scholarships for first-generation college students studying finance, remembering how Eleanor and I had both relied on similar support. Through this period of healing and growth, I often reflected on the parental instincts that had guided my decision to keep the inheritance private during Sophia's wedding. Those quiet concerns about Derek's character, easily dismissed as overprotectiveness, had proven tragically accurate. Yet Eleanor's posthumous protection through careful estate planning had limited the damage he could cause. Mom's still taking care of us, Sophia observed on the 3rd anniversary of Eleanor's passing as we placed flowers at her grave. Her wisdom keeps guiding our decisions. She always saw further ahead than most people, I agreed. Even during her illness, she was thinking about protecting you. Nearly 2 years after the divorce, Sophia mentioned meeting someone through her volunteer work with the foundation. His name is Michael. He teaches financial literacy to high school students, she said casually over dinner. We've been having coffee after committee meetings. I noticed the careful way she mentioned him, the lesson of rushing into relationships thoroughly learned. Over the following months, Michael was occasionally referenced in conversation, the relationship developing at a measured pace, built on shared values rather than whirlwind romance. When I finally met him 6 months later, I was struck by the differences from my first meeting with Derek. Where Derek had immediately assessed our home for signs of wealth, Michael noticed the family photographs and asked about the stories behind them. Where Derek had name-dropped and emphasized status, Michael spoke passionately about his students and their progress. Most tellingly, when the topic of Eleanor's successful career arose naturally in conversation, Michael's questions focused on her investment philosophy and ethical approach, rather than the size of her fund or financial outcomes. Your wife sounds like she was an extraordinary person, he said. I would have loved to hear her perspective on ethical investing. That's an area where we need more pioneering voices. As Sophia rebuilt her life with newfound wisdom and purpose, I often contemplated the complex balance between privacy and transparency regarding wealth. Eleanor's insistence on privacy had protected us from Derek's predatory intentions, Yet complete secrecy within families could create its own problems of trust and preparation. We found our balance in the years that followed, with Sophia fully informed about her inheritance, but maintaining the same modest lifestyle and focus on meaningful work that Eleanor had modeled. The wealth remained a tool for impact, rather than a source of identity or status, exactly as Eleanor had intended. On quiet evenings in the home, where we had raised Sophia together, I sometimes felt Eleanor's presence and approval of how we had navigated these challenges. Her wisdom continued guiding our family decisions long after her physical presence had gone, her values living on through the foundation bearing her name and the daughter who embodied her strength. The $33 million inheritance that Derek had so desperately sought to access was indeed transforming lives, but not in the way he had imagined. Instead of funding luxury real estate and status symbols, it supported educational opportunities, financial literacy programs, and protection for vulnerable individuals, creating a legacy of far greater value than the dollars themselves. Have you ever had to protect your family from someone with ulterior motives? Or discovered that keeping certain information private was ultimately the wisest choice? I'd love to hear your stories and insights in the comments below. If this story of financial manipulation and family protection resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Share this video with someone who might benefit from recognizing the warning signs of financial predators. Thank you for listening to an old finance professional's story of inheritance, deception, and the power of parental instinct. Remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the wisdom we pass down and the values we uphold when faced with life's most challenging tests.